Rick Doblin is the founder and president of the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, MAPS. He has been a leading voice in advancing psychedelic research and therapy for decades. In our conversation, filmed at the Psychedelic Science 2025 conference in Denver, he shares his vision for integrating psychedelics into mainstream culture and mental health care. We discuss how he sees the state of the movement after 40 years of activism and what the future may hold following the FDA's rejection of MDMA-assisted therapy approval. June 2024, two scientific bodies came to very different conclusions about the same subject.
Yes.
The Dutch State Commission said that MDMA therapy is effective and safe, while FDA made a decision to reject the same treatment. Why do you think these two bodies came to so different conclusions?
I'm so glad you've started with that question. I think there's several major reasons. First off, the Dutch committee had real subject matter experts. The people that were on the FDA advisory committee mostly didn't know what they were talking about, didn't know about psychedelics, didn't even know that much about therapy, knew hardly anything about PTSD. So first off, the qualifications of the people. Secondly, the Dutch group had about a year to study the data, and the FDA advisory committee had a couple weeks. But I think the most important point is that the Dutch group had to justify their findings in writing a report, which meant that they had to stick to the evidence, they had to think about the evidence, whereas all the FDA advisory committee people had to do was say, oh, I vote this, I vote that. They were much more influenced by the media, the FDA advisory committee, than they were by the briefing package that was given to them by the FDA. And they acknowledged multiple times that they didn't really know what was going on. The patient representative said something outrageous in the FDA advisory committee, that she didn't even understand why we needed any new treatments. The treatments we have for PTSD are good. They raised all sorts of, well, I think it's really the issue of the media and the negativity that started with the, started before the ICER report. But I think the FDA advisory committee, when you don't really have to justify your decisions based on the data, you just say, oh, we doubt this, we doubt that. It's a lot easier. So the FDA itself has been trying to change the advisory committee system to make it so that they advise, but they don't vote. Because the vote makes it seem like they're much more judicial, they're much more, scientific review, they're much more rigorous than they actually are. So I think it was that the Dutch committee understood there was an unmet medical need. The FDA advisory committee didn't seem to grasp that. So I think it was a whole bunch of different factors. And I think historically, in some ways, it's so coincidental, you could say. If the Dutch State Committee had come out 2 days before the FDA committee, then that would have influenced the FDA committee, because it was like a scientific analysis of the data. But they came out 2 days after the FDA advisory committee. So the FDA advisory committee didn't know that there was this scientific body. Then what happened is the Lycos people and their media people made a major mistake, which was they didn't tell people about the Dutch State Committee. They purposely decided not to mention it to people. And they just thought, oh, I don't know, it doesn't matter, it's Europe doesn't matter to US. It just was one strategic mistake on the other.
Was it the reason why you resigned from the Lycos board?
No. What it felt to me like I was involved in a slow motion car crash where I was in the passenger seat and Lycos was in the driver's seat. So it started earlier, I would say in March 2023, there was an article in JAMA Psychiatry criticizing the psychotherapeutic method by Symposia and some main people. Lycos decided not to respond. And then they blocked MAPS from responding, they blocked me from responding, they blocked the therapist from responding, and they were able to say oh, we don't respond to the critics, because then it just brings more attention to the critics. So when you are in a scientific discussions, if you don't respond to the critics, people think you don't have any response. They think the critics are right. So I was silenced by being on the Lykos board. They were able, the Lykos management and the Lykos board was able to convince enough people on the MAPS board that MAPS should be silenced, that I should be silenced, that because I'm on the Lykos board, I should support management and no matter what they do, which isn't the way corporations work anyway. You can have activist shareholders that disagree. So I resigned from the Lykos board so I would regain my voice, so MAPS would regain its voice.
If you could start it over, what would you do differently?
Well, I would say the main thing I would do is there was this critical point where we started to get consultations from supposed experts on commercialization. Now, I studied my PhD, all of that was in drug development, but I didn't understand commercialization. Amy Emerson, her expertise was drug development. She didn't understand commercialization. So then we get these consultants that are telling us, oh, you got to spend $70 million on this 80, 90 person commercialization team, and you need, you should have started it a year ago. And this was at the rise of the for-profit companies as well. And so we could no longer raise donations. People were saying we need to invest. Look at all these people making money. So this may sound, I don't know, arrogant maybe. But the mistake was trusting the experts. So Antonio Gracias, who's the sort of new investor, his diagnosis was the main mistake we made was moving from startup to big pharma too soon. We ended up hiring people, outrageous salaries, because they thought they deserved them from being in the pharma industry, traditional people, and they didn't really understand psychedelic therapy, and they wanted to be more of a drug company, not a drug plus therapy company. So I think the main mistake was to not just muddle through and learn on the job as we did commercialization, and to do it in a startup way, and instead turn it over to experts who didn't really, whose frame of reference was traditional pharma. That I think was the main mistake.
Apart from commercialization, there were also some accusations that it is like becoming a spiritual cult instead of a research project.
Yeah.
What would you respond to that?
Well, first off, let me say that during this whole period of time, we were blocked from responding. MAPS, the time where it mattered. Now it's after FDA rejection. So sometimes criticism seems so outrageous that you wonder how could anybody believe it. So a therapy cult or we're not an organization where everybody has to think the same thing. These are the accusations that were not responded to by Lykos, that we were blocked from responding. I don't even know what it means, really, a therapy cult. We have very independent-minded therapists. So some of the criticisms are, inner healing intelligence. You have this concept of inner healing intelligence. And that's somehow biasing everybody, and that's a spiritual thing. And that there's this, somehow this mystical knowledge that you have to believe in. This kind of inner healing intelligence. When the inner healing intelligence is kind of an explanatory model, I'd say it's more rigorous than serotonin model, than neurotransmitter models. But it's not anything you have to believe in. The whole thing about inner healing intelligence is trust the process, that what's emerging, we support it. So then you can come up with, what's your theory? There's an inner healing intelligence. We know there is an inner healing intelligence with our body. We know that our body tries to restore wholeness, that it works below our level of conscious awareness, that there's this self-healing mechanisms that happen all the time within certain limits. So these were accusations that I think were made for the media, but therapy cults, our full share of independent-minded people, disagreements, not a therapy cult. If everybody thought I was right, that would have been really better because I was right about a lot of things. Certainly more right than the pharma company people. So no, I just think it's absurd.
Okay.
You know, and then when you say, oh, it's like Scientology, or it's like Nexium, where the, you know, sex cult, where the people go to jail, where it's high control, none of that is accurate at all.
There were also some methodological criticisms like the blinding problem and expectancy bias. How do you see those issues?
All right, so here's one of the classic examples of the terrible strategy of the pharma company. So there was an article a couple weeks before the FDA Advisory Committee in the Washington Post. And the Washington Post raised some of these questions. What about the double blind? What about expectancy? And again, I wanted to reply. And the MAPS media team wanted to reply. And we got this message from Lycos saying, we do not need to convince the Washington Post. We just need to convince the FDA. And so we didn't reply. And so the advisory committee gets into this thing, oh, we read the Washington Post, we read the ICER all criticizing. So the methodological problems, there's no good solution, simple solution to the double-blind problem. But more importantly, a big part of my dissertation, which I completed in 2001, before we started all these studies, was how to deal with the double-blind problem. And the solution that I have was different than the solution that you suggested. Basically, it was that it should be therapy with low-dose MDMA versus therapy with full-dose MDMA. And the challenge is to find the low dose that's high enough to cause confusion. So the challenge is, what's the low dose microdose doesn't work? What's the low dose that's causing enough confusion? You're not sure whether it's the full dose, the smaller dose, but it's not such a high dose that it has therapeutic potential. And then you'll not be able to tell the difference between the two groups. So we spent 16 years trying to find the right dose. And we looked at therapy with inactive placebo, therapy with 25 milligrams, with 30 milligrams, with 40 milligrams, with 50, 75, 100, 125, and 150. And in each of these situations, we give half the initial after 2 hours to keep the plateau. And so we were sort of looking for this sweet spot of where is this dose. And what we found, to our surprise, was that the lower doses did cause a bit more confusion, but they made people uncomfortable. So this is like the 25, 30, 40, and 50. And what it turned out is that we got better results in the people that got therapy with no MDMA than the people that got therapy with low-dose MDMA. Then the example I use is like turbulence taking off in an airplane. At the beginning, it's kind of turbulent, but then you get high enough and it's smooth. So it's that way with low doses of things. Sometimes they can activate you. Now, these are not even healthy volunteers, of course. These are people with lots of PTSD. The other thing that surprised us, we did a study that was in firefighters, police officers, and veterans mostly. And we had 3 different dose groups, and one of them was around 30 milligrams, one was 75, one was 125. And in this particular study, because of randomization, it's not always equal, but the group that had 125 had more comorbid depression with the PTSD than the group that had the 75. But the 75 milligram group did the best, even better than the 125 group. So even aside from this situation with the depression, we found that the 75 milligram dose group was very effective. So we didn't find this sweet spot of where to do this active control that was either not hurting the therapy as compared to no MDMA at all, or not really helping the therapy. So I think we hurt ourselves by wanting to be too scientific. So we went to the FDA during this 8-month process after we got approval to go to phase 3. So I knew that the double blind was going to be an issue and that we needed to come to an agreement with an FDA ahead of time. And that's the whole purpose of this special protocol assessment process. And so we presented that information. We said we'd be glad to give you blinding, but you're going to make our job easier to find a difference between the two groups because the blinding at these lower doses compromises the therapy. And then we said that the real question, we think, is if you can do this with therapy, why add the drug? And so you should be testing the therapy when it's the most effective. The other thing we said is that in the safety database, if we use a low-dose MDMA, we're not sure if there's serious adverse events. Are they due to this low-dose MDMA that's making people uncomfortable, or is it due to the therapy or whatever? So when you have an inactive placebo, what you know is that whatever side effects you see are from the therapy, from people with severe PTSD or moderate to severe PTSD going through the therapy. It's not because you've added a little catalyst of a drug. So you get a better safety database when you do therapy with inactive placebo. So we presented to the FDA and said, you tell us what you want us to do. And then what they said is that in reality, the double blind fails all the time, even with SSRIs, that you have the side effect profiles that the patients can recognize, the therapists often can recognize. So what the FDA said is that in acknowledgement of the functional unblinding actually taking place, there's two main ways to reduce experimenter bias that they wanted to introduce into the study. The first is something everybody does, random assignment. Everybody is similarly motivated. The second is this robust series of independent raters, where the raters are blind to the condition, whether somebody got MDMA or somebody got the placebo, or whether they're in the control group or the treatment group. And we had over 20 independent raters that did monthly inter-rater reliability. They were randomly assigned to the next person that needed it. So we instituted this very robust system of independent raters. And that's what the FDA agreed on. And so our problem was the people that we worked with at the FDA that agreed on this left the FDA. And then new, more conservative people at the Division of Psychiatry took over. Because when you make these agreements, you're not supposed to be making it with individuals, you're making it with the agency. If you've had a chance to look at the briefing package that was given by the FDA to the advisory committee, these new people raised all these questions about the functional unblinding, and we don't know if we can trust the results. They would put in a little thing, but we did agree to this. This is not the issue. But they didn't explain why. And the company itself did a very poor job of explaining how the design was chosen, why the FDA itself chose inactive placebo when presented with our data. And so the functional unblinding became a bigger issue. And it's something I knew because academic people who tend to be the ones that are in the advisory committee meeting, they're more wedded to this idea, this theoretical idea of the blinding. But the FDA and pharma companies know, you need to make these trade-offs. If a drug like a psychedelic drug produces subjective experiences that it's hard to do blinding, that doesn't mean you just throw away the drug and you never study it. There's practical things. You try to see what is the impact of the functional unblinding. So I think that the results that we had, when you have chronic PTSD, which was defined as people having 6 months PTSD, people don't tend to get better unless there's some intervention. It's not like this, it comes and goes. So for example, I met this team that did expanded access it's called Pearl Institute. They're a little bit west of Asheville, North Carolina. They treated 4 people in the expanded access, the open sort of compassionate use, open label. And they had 4 people that had PTSD for enormously long times. One of them, almost 60 years. These are people from Vietnam that had PTSD from Vietnam. They all got better, and they no longer had PTSD. But these are people that had PTSD 30 years. One of them had PTSD about 60 years. So this idea that once you've got this chronic PTSD, that, it's just can disappear, it's not that way. So when we have an intervention, which our intervention is therapy, either with or without MDMA, we're showing pretty remarkable results. And the results that we showed in the therapy arm without the MDMA were really remarkable, better than any other therapy with a lower dropout rate. So what we're altering is long-term standing patterns. And it's true that you can alter them with a different kind of therapeutic approach. So we have 8-hour therapy, we have support, people have eye shades, they have music. They have a lot of time to go through it. At my opening talk, I showed the results of a study that was done by the VA with 916 subjects. Took them like 6 years to do it, comparing the two main therapies, prolonged exposure and cognitive processing therapy. And they had roughly 50% of the people drop out of the study because the therapy itself was re-traumatizing. We had much, much less. I mean, in the MDMA group, hardly anybody dropped out. We had, 2%, something like that. In the placebo group, we had a higher dropout rate, but it was still way lower than the 50%. And some of it wasn't because they couldn't handle the therapy. It's because they realized it was the inactive placebo. They were disappointed, and then left the study. So I think this concept of, is our data really unreliable because of this? I don't think so. I think that we altered long-standing patterns. We demonstrated remarkable results in the control group, which indicates to me that the therapists were really trying their hardest. They weren't just saying, this guy got placebo or this woman got placebo, let's just, not try. The results were outstanding compared to any other therapy. So there's no evidence in my mind that the therapists didn't try hard or the patients didn't, try to get better. Yeah.
It's quite frustrating that ketamine went through the process very smoothly, while MDMA didn't make it.
Well, ketamine was done by a big pharma. Yeah, if you look at they had suicides in the ketamine group. They had real blinding problems. But it was big pharma without therapy.
I read this article from Thomas Inzel. He concluded that the regulatory system is not optimized for mental health care.
Yes.
It's like there is a major problem with the regulatory system. Do you agree with that?
Completely. And I think in that same article that you're probably talking about with Tom Insel, what he said is that the real innovation of MAPS was not looking at psychedelics. It was looking at psychedelics combined with therapy and really trying to optimize outcomes for what's best for the patients. And that this innovation of drug plus therapy is something that had never really been through the FDA. So we just talked about ketamine. Ketamine was approved without therapy. I heard someone works with ketamine patients, took over a practice. Somebody has gotten ketamine 200 times, one of her patients. Another was 60 times. It's outrageous because when you don't use it with therapy, the results fade really quickly. You need more ketamine, but that's in the best interest of the pharma company because they're selling drugs. It's not about patients, it's about profits. So I think Tom Insel was really right that this system, with this sort of wedded to if the double blind doesn't work, then we can't trust the results. And that, how do you account for the therapeutic approach? Yeah.
2 years ago, you had a full white suit.
Yeah.
This year, you wore half black, half white. I think you signify that you are in grief, partly.
Well, black and blue sort of means you're bruised. Yeah, beaten up and bruised.
Yeah. So, how did you work with that grief? You always say that people are meaning-making machines.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
How did you give a meaning to this?
Thank you. That's a really good question. It's been hard, yeah, because, like I said, being in a slow motion car crash and not being in the driver's seat and seeing that Lycos is not responding to critics, is not really addressing the issues that were being raised. So the problem really is not the critics. That's science. Science is the critics. The problem is not responding. So it was kind of despair when I saw this strategy by traditional pharma people that was sort of leading to disaster. So I just had to accept that a lot was accomplished, not much of what I hoped, that the pharma company, not only that, but absorbed and wasted, lost hundreds of millions of value as well, to MAPS. Yeah, it was tough, I say. But then you think, okay, well, that happened, now what do I do now? So that's what I'm saying. I think this conference took place recently now, at a good amount of time after the defeats, enough to try to process the grief and then try to move forward. So the way I kind of process my grief is by work, I guess, feel it, but then try to move forward in some ways. And I've basically separated myself from the pharma company, and MAPS is focusing on international work and humanitarian work and in terms of our research. So I've found ways that things that are not happening otherwise, that wouldn't happen if MAPS wasn't doing them, that are meaningful, that are important. Like, for example, training Ukrainian therapists and trying to help bring MDMA to Ukraine for the enormous amount of trauma that's there. The pharma company is not going to say, oh, Ukraine, it's a big profit center, let me go help. So that's been really good, going to Beirut and working there and trying to bring MDMA to Lebanon, the work we're trying to do in group therapy. So Lykos is not really doing much with group therapy. MAPS Israel's got the largest study in the world comparing individual therapy with group therapy. So it's by finding new ways to contribute, new things that need to be known that will help patients is the way I process the grief.
Do you think that group therapy could solve the problem of the high price of psychedelic-assisted therapy?
No, I think I think group therapy has a potential of, dramatically lowering the cost. You may not expect this answer, but what we need is legalization. We need legal access for everybody under certain conditions, what they happen to be. A license you get, like a driver's license. I think you should get a license to do drugs. You'd have to take a little test. The thing is, if you misbehave, you then get punished for your behavior, but you also lose your license to buy drugs. What I'm just trying to say is that we need legal access for people who are not necessarily having a diagnosis at generic prices. An MDMA is sold for $10. You can buy MDMA for $20, $10. Lykos put out a cost-effectiveness study that said that they believe they could justify to insurance companies $12,000 for one dose of MDMA because the results were so great. So we need legalization and state-level reform as a sort of counter to the pharma industry. Now, group therapy will reduce the cost of the therapists, but if the company still says we're going to charge $12,000 a dose or whatever, I don't think they will. I think they just put there as a kind of a negotiating tactic, saying that insurance companies, I think, would pay for that. But they will put a very high price on the drug, and they'll try to capture as much of the money as they can from the consumer, from the patient, for the drug. And so, for example, in this cost-effectiveness study, they put roughly $12,400 for the therapists, $36,000 for the drug. All right, so if you reduce the therapy cost to nothing, it's outrageous to pay $36,000 to get MDMA. So the group therapy will only reduce some of it, the pharma company and their approach to maximize profits. The thing I am concerned about is what the insurance companies are willing to pay is based on the outcomes that we got with highly trained therapists. The company's not going to do that. So I don't know that the marketplace is going to get as good results as we did in the study. I don't know that the insurance companies will be willing to pay as much as the company put out in this paper. So I think as long as you've got pharma companies that are separating drug from therapy and are thinking about making money on the drug as much as they can, that group therapy will only have marginal effects on making it more widely acceptable. However, let's say in Ukraine, which we talked about before, Ukraine is not part of the European Union. It's not necessarily part of the European Medicines Agency. It can chart its own way. It could, because of the scale of the need, it could say, we're going to start up manufacturing inside Ukraine. And we're going to try to produce it at low price, and we're going to make it available to our millions and millions and millions of traumatized people. In that kind of a situation, group therapy could make all the difference.
So the current Trump administration has a lot of controversial policies, but it seems they are not so negative about psychedelic research, right? So how do you see the role of the federal government now? Do you think there will be any breakthroughs anytime soon?
My feeling, it's rather astonishing, that one of the things that's going forward, one of the few things that's going forward is support for psychedelics in the Trump administration. And I think there is real support there. I think the work that we did, the conscious strategy to try to work with veterans and sympathetic patients, is what's got us bipartisan support. So there's very few things that are not part of the culture wars in the United States, and psychedelics are one of them. And so I think that there is an interest in approving psychedelics. I think there is an interest in recognizing that the advisory committee wasn't really making a scientific decision, that they were hearing things that were exaggerated, not true. MAPS is a therapy called everybody's getting abused in these studies, things like that, or that it was liable for many people to be abused. The number of veteran suicides is terrible. More people are dying. I think MDMA really helps with reduced suicidality. Where I said before that we had the inactive placebo, because then we could have a better safety database, because we had one person try to kill herself twice, another person checked herself into a hospital not to kill herself. Both were in the placebo group. We had none of that in the MDMA group. And so I think the work in the VA, the work with the active duty soldiers will demonstrate, and we have evidence from the past already, that MDMA can really reduce suicidality. And so I think that the Trump administration, the people there, will know that, and they will see that. And so I think there's a challenge to address the critics and demonstrate to the FDA that the data is valid, and that there should be a way to move forward. And if they have to move forward with more data, that it should be in a phase 4 context post-approval, not another phase 3 study. Whether that'll happen or not, I'm not sure, but it will be approved eventually, and I think that's the main message. I think that my personal view is that if Lykos was going to be more focused on the therapy and saying we're going to have minimum requirements of therapists before they work with a patient, we will want them to have certain kind of trainings. The trainings they get to become a therapist or to become a psychiatrist right now, since no psychedelic therapies are legal, you don't get educated in psychiatry or psychotherapy schools about psychedelic psychotherapy. If the company were to say, we want to have a certain number of requirements that people know this or that, that would reassure the FDA. But I don't think the company is going to do that. So, but I still think that there's a good chance that because of the major unmet medical need, that under this Trump administration, they will move forward with approval. But I can't say. It's either, hopefully within the next 6 months or a year, it'll be yes without another phase 3 study, or if it's another phase 3 study, it'll be 3 or 4 years.
So it's almost 40 years you founded MAPS. Yeah. If the Rick Doblin of the 80s could time travel and come to see how is the psychedelic scene today, would he be enthusiastic or disappointed?
Well, I'd be both. When you think about MDMA being criminalized in 1985, okay, so that is 40 years ago. How many veterans have committed suicide since then? Hundreds of thousands, more than 200,000. have committed suicide, just veterans. So if I would have seen that it would have taken almost 40 years and we're not there, it's tragic. But when I started, I thought it might never work anyway. I mean, we were in the middle of this massive DEA suppression of it, but also when I started in '86, we were in this period where FDA was blocking all psychedelic research. There was no psychedelic research, not anywhere in the world even. So it was pretty grim when I started. And so in some ways, I'd be disappointed at the scale of the suffering that didn't need to be, and that it has taken us this long. But on the other hand, I never thought that there would be hundreds of for-profit psychedelic companies, a lot less now, a bunch of them have gone out of business, but that there would be over $4 billion invested in for-profit psychedelic companies. So in that way, I would have been kind of astonished that we are where we're at, that we have state programs like Oregon. Over 10,000 people have gotten legal access to psilocybin in Oregon. More than all the psilocybin research all over the world in the last 25 years. So in one hand, we're in a good shape. I think it's moving forward. The tragedy is it took so long. But the good part is I started at a point where it seemed impossible. It would just seem like worthy to do. But I somehow knew that the therapy, the benefits were so true. And the fear, when I started, the fears were so unrealistic. MDMA, holes in your brain, you're going to cause terrible neurotoxicity, one dose. This is what the National Institute on Drug Abuse was saying. To criminalize it, one dose, serious brain damage, major functional consequences. When hundreds of thousands of people were doing fine, it was like this complete twisted political approach towards science. So I guess we are where we are. It always felt like a good idea to keep working on it. But I think if I would have told it would take 40 years and it still wouldn't be approved, I would have been shocked. I wouldn't have stopped doing anything, but I would have been shocked.
So it's a multi-generational struggle, right?
Yes, yeah.
What are the most exciting developments in psychedelic science these days?
The project in MAPS Israel will be the largest study in the world, the only study in the world that I'm aware of right now, comparing directly individual therapy versus group therapy for scaling, for reducing the cost. That's really exciting. There's projects in Australia that are tremendous where they're actually working where depression, but they give people 2 psilocybin experiences, 2 MDMA experiences. So they're starting to say it's not a treatment that is just one psychedelic necessarily. We're now different psychedelics have different qualities, bring different things to the surface. So basically what I'm saying is that the science is starting to catch up with the underground. The underground is way ahead of the scientific research. So there's starting to be studies where you give patients not just one psychedelic, but several. One of the things that was the most intriguing to me that I'm very hopeful about is a project from Brazil. And this is a project that's using DMT for depression. So it started out as ayahuasca for depression. But it was ayahuasca taken out of a religious ceremonial context and administered in a hospital setting without a ceremony. And ayahuasca showed that it was very helpful in reducing depression. Similar to psilocybin, you break these patterns of thought. But then the researchers have thought, well, let's see what happens with DMT. And so they've done it where you smoke DMT for 15 minutes, you're high, but it's 4 hours of prep and therapy during the actual session, and the results are as good as ayahuasca. And they think this is a remarkable new opportunity in a shorter period of time to use DMT. So they have taken in Brazil from the indigenous use, then moved the ayahuasca into a scientific context, a scientific medical ritual, you could say, and now they've moved it just to the DMT in vape pens or shorter. So it's this evolution that I think is respectful of the indigenous use, and what they want to do is try to develop it in a real public benefit company as hopefully relatively lower expensive treatment for depression. So in a way, this is an opportunity to do what I had wanted to do with Lykos, is really focus on public benefit. And that's been tremendously exciting for me. Ketamine combined with therapy is also, a bunch of reports were done here. There's a group that does ketamine-assisted couples therapy. So as I said, as we talked, ketamine has been approved without therapy. And it's suboptimal, and the results fade, but you got to buy more ketamine. But more and more people are understanding, if they're about the patients, that it's better to combine ketamine with therapy. That's like Tom Insel saying, our innovation is really psychedelics with therapy. So I think this movement to add therapy to ketamine, I think, is going to be getting bigger. The neuroscience research is moving forward really quite a lot. But I don't see that the neuroscience knowledge is actually helping the patients. I don't see it translating to the clinic, but I do see it translating to potentially developing new medications, to trying to develop new molecules and understanding new receptor sites. I think the other part that is really exciting, you might be surprised to hear me say it, but it's non-psychedelic psychedelics. There's this, what I also learned, that for sort of traumatic brain injury, for neuroplasticity, for cluster headaches, for example, you don't need the psychedelic component necessarily. That's what has been demonstrated with bromo-LSD, non-psychedelic version of LSD, and it still helps. So I think there's a lot of benefits for brain recovery, traumatic brain injury, that can come from taking the psychedelic out of the psychedelics.
And the last question about the conference. The main theme of the conference was integration. Why have you chosen this theme? How do you feel about the conference? Like, could it really bring us closer to the understanding of integration?
Yeah, well, I think the theme of integration was chosen because, in a way, FDA had rejected MDMA. It's about integration into society. So not just integration after a psychedelic experience, but integration of psychedelics into society. And we'd been through this sort of downturn where the integration was pushed away. Both the Massachusetts Natural Plant Initiative, which went down to defeat with 57% no, and the FDA rejection of MDMA. So it was the rejection of integration. And so we chose integration as the theme to try to say where we need to go. I think that this conference will help tremendously. I mean, there were some major policymakers, senior people from the Trump administration. They're going to have a big impact on how psychedelics get regulated. They were here. There was people from the military, a lot of people. There was politicians from all different spectrums, all different political parties. There was people from all over the world. There was people from different states in the U.S. that are doing state programs. So I think the sharing, the sense of hope and optimism, what I'll just say is that there was incredible research presented at this conference. So much stuff that I didn't even know was even happening. I think the strength of the research, the strength of the many, many different ways that psychedelics have been helpful for patients, different psychedelics, different patient populations, it's just overwhelming, the evidence. So I think that is going to continue. Plus, we had some major donors that are finding ways to help in the community. So I think the donors, MAPS made its $500,000 match. That was good. But there's people considering investing $50 or $100 million in philanthropy, in psychedelics around the world. So I think the conference was tremendously successful. It was agony, I would say, over the last 6 months internally. So many things didn't go as we wanted, and it was just struggle, and it was, you're constantly fielding complaints, and some of them justified, and so it was just this real agony up to the conference. But once the conference started, it just felt like a state of grace. Like, it was smooth, we're all grateful we're here, we're all learning from each other. So I feel that Fox News was here. So I think it's really going to help integrate into that culture, and it'll be an inspirational moment for a lot of the people that were here, and they recognize we just got to keep going, and that it will eventually succeed. And the patients count on us. The world's in a kind of warlike state like now in a lot of different places. The scale of the trauma, the scale of what Trump is doing, not just ignoring climate change, is actively trying to destroy responses to climate change, to defund alternative renewable energy and things like that, so that the sense of blindness, but the sense of disruptions that's going to be occurring over time that America is making worse now, I think makes people more realize we need to help people process this trauma, this struggles, what we're doing to the environment, what we're doing to full immigrants, all of this. A lot of people didn't come to the conference because they didn't want to come to America. So thank you guys. So I think overall the conference was just a tremendous success, and has inspired lots of people, inspired me, inspired the MAP staff. But the important part is what you're doing now. It's telling the story. We need to really, so the storytelling part is what was lost by Lycos saying we're not going to respond, we're going to have a quiet period, we're going to block maps. We lost control of the narrative. And I think this conference is helping regain control of the narrative.